if you're a student, teacher, or parent, you know firsthand how dramatically the COVID-19 pandemic has transformed the way we teach and learn. With most instruction remotely delivered, new challenges arise daily. To succeed in this digital environment, access to digital devices is requirement number one. But even before COVID-19, this access has not been granted equally among socioeconomic groups. Low-income Black and Latinx children often find themselves without a computer or laptop or connection to the internet. Yet getting the right equipment into students' hands may not be enough. Today, EdCast examines what's needed beyond devices for effective teaching and learning in the online environment, and what it takes to close the digital divide. Now on EdCast.
After nearly a month without any assignments, her school launched an online platform. But Kennedy says that hasn't made it easier.
Not only is this new to us, but it's new to the teachers as well. And sometimes the teachers have difficulties when they're trying to program it, and then they assign it as if they know that everyone has availability or the opportunity to have technology in their home when that's not the case. So it's kind of frustrating. Grosse Pointe is right next to us, and they got resources the second this pandemic started. Their educational system isn't lacking as much as we are. And it's just like, wow, why can't we be like that? Or why can't we step in and give to our students like they are? Because our students are no different from theirs.
I've had tons of stories told about parents who are pulling up in the parking lots of their neighborhood schools to tap into their Wi-Fi, or sitting out in McDonald's trying to get access by sitting at a local table. In some communities, kids have done it so much that they've changed the hours and the policies for those kids to actually sit there. So that's what the experience looks like when you're not connected.
My name is Alia Phillips. I am 10 years old. I live in New York, and I live in a shelter, and I love playing violin.
I got contacted by her school to go pick up her iPad device. Her iPad does not have internet. The shelter that we're in, they do not allow internet. What classroom stuff are we going to do today? Math?
Well, science is already too hard. It keeps on pausing itself, just freezing.
Oh, okay. I will look into that.
Joining me today is Matthew Mugo Fields, Executive Vice President General Manager at EdTech company Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. He is also co-founder of Innovation for Equity, a nonprofit organization that promotes innovative ways of improving life outcomes for Black learners. Matthew has devoted his career to transforming education and working to ensure that academic success is attainable for students of all backgrounds. Good morning, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us today on EdCast to discuss a topic that is increasingly in the news. We know the COVID-19 pandemic has really pushed remote learning into the forefront. For many students, it's the only way they're receiving instruction right now. And we also know that there have been some issues about who gets the equipment, who's able to easily partake of this kind of instruction. And yet I know you've also said it's more complex than just having access. So I want to talk to you in depth today a bit. Can we begin by just defining once again, what is the digital divide?
Linda, thank you so much for having me. This is a real pleasure to spend some time with you discussing these really important issues. So you asked about a definition for the digital divide, and typically the digital divide is thought of as that gap between folks who have computers, devices, and internet access, and those who don't. Obviously, issues of digital divide are front and center right now, as many schools around the country are grappling with the unique challenges of this back-to-school season. Many schools are engaging in remote learning or considered hybrid learning, so part remote, part in the physical classroom. And a device, an internet access, is an essential learning tool for students in those situations.
So the bare minimum that any student would have to have would be what? What's the bare minimum?
So I'd say the bare minimum is an age-appropriate device that can differ for students. In some younger grades, maybe students can do a lot more with a tablet, pointing and clicking, those kinds of things, versus students in high school who need to write long essays and probably could benefit from a laptop or even a desktop computer. So a device is key. Internet access, high-speed internet access, so students can engage in learning with their teachers, whether it's over video like Zoom, like we're doing right now, or use some of the more advanced apps and software that's out there that helps students practice and even making sure that students have the ability to have that internet access all throughout the day. We used to think of this as sort of a homework gap. We used to call it the homework gap. Some students would go home and they would have access to the internet and they could do their research and they could work on their papers and they could collaborate with friends on group projects, and other students couldn't. Well, everyone is subject to that in this particular moment. So that's the bare minimum stuff. We gotta get that basic infrastructure of devices and internet connectivity to students all around the country.
That's an interesting distinction you made about the kind of device, depending on the age of the student. I really haven't heard anybody point that out, and that is an excellent point, that the 5-year-old and the high school, college students, may need different kinds of devices, different kinds of apps, different things. That's a very good distinction. Let's talk a little bit about what this looked like before the pandemic in terms of who had access to what and what you're seeing right now.
Yeah, so we typically have talked about this notion of who had access to what in the terminology of a device to student ratio. So, on average around the country, there were 2 students per learning device, as we kind of came into the pandemic. What we saw was a rapid acceleration of more districts providing devices, particularly for those students who were subject to the digital divide. Their families either couldn't afford or didn't have access to a dedicated device for the student. So many districts and indeed states, and there's even been some federal funding set aside to help fund that. And we think that the ratio now is heading quickly towards more like a 1-to-1. There were some statistics that came out during sort of the spring that suggested that high schools and middle schools were almost at a 1 device per student. And there's in fact been recent research that suggests that there's a near 20% year-over-year increase in sales for laptops, which are the dominant form of devices that are used in schools. So that's what's changing in terms of the infrastructure. So in some ways, we are beginning to, or I should say continuing to, make progress against the basics of the digital divide, getting devices in students' hands, and getting those students internet access. Even some internet providers have stepped up and have been working with school systems to do that. I keep emphasizing it as the basics, and you do too, because we know that it's just that. It's a beginning. 1-to-1 device to student ratio is the beginning of a journey. It's not the end.
Do you think students will be able to keep those devices when the pandemic is over, or will schools ask them to give them back? I mean,
I think, as all things K-12 education in our country, right? The answer is always, it depends. There are, over 13,000 school districts in the country, and they each do things a little bit differently. I would suspect, however, that we are at an inflection point, that we aren't going to go back. Whether those devices always stay with the students or there's something that students can access when they're in school, one thing is for sure, there is a significant change occurring in K-12 education in the U.S., higher ed too, but K-12 perhaps even more dramatically right now, and we're not going to go back to the pre-COVID days. It won't always be in this sort of crisis phase that we're in right now, but certainly having students begin leveraging new technology, having that become more a part of sort of the normal behavior and the normal routines of schools for students and teachers is something that's beginning to occur right now, and I don't see us going back.
We are still hearing, of course, about kids who are going into parking lots to get the internet, or sitting outside in front of the McDonald's to get the internet. And we know that in rural communities, there has been a gap in terms of internet and broadband access for a long time. Do you see that improving as well? I know you mentioned kids are getting computers and internet. Do you think that there is an improvement now in their access to the internet as well?
Yeah, I mean, I know it is definitely remains a challenge for sure, and all the examples you cited are very real, and are challenging, particularly for students from lower income communities, whether they be rural or urban. Access to the internet is not always available, particularly at high speed internet. That being said, there are efforts, again, federally, state, and even locally, to address some of those issues, and you know, we're doing a lot of learning right now. I think it's apropos. Yeah, exactly. I think it's apropos that sort of all of us in the world of education are in a huge learning moment. We tons of experimentation happening, whether it be, you know, Wi-Fi being provided by buses that are parked throughout the community, whether it be you know, districts creating partnerships with telecom companies to provide access via the home for families during the school year. All of those kinds of things are happening right now, and we're going to learn a ton and see what works best in the future.
Well, I know you've been looking at these issues for a while in terms of digital equipment and what it means in terms of how students learn. And I think you have a more nuanced view, a more complex look at what's really effective teaching and learning with these devices, and what we need beyond just plugging in or just, you know, getting the internet and having a laptop. So tell me a little bit more about what you think are some of the other issues that surround this one.
Yeah, I like being accused of having a nuanced view. So yes, you're absolutely right. I had the pleasure of working at Houghton Mifflin Harcourt HMH with lots of people who spend a lot of time and energy thinking about these issues and how we can best assist educators in meeting the challenges that they confront. We've talked a lot so far about getting the infrastructure, the devices, the connectivity in place. We view that as essential. In fact, you know, our CEO, Jack Lynch, has called for a new deal for education, if you will, to make sure that infrastructure gets in place around the country. So you know, we think of that as, you know, getting students connected to the internet, connected to each other, connected to their educators. So that's sort of foundational. But beyond that, one of the interesting things that is happening in this particular moment in education is there's just an explosion of usage of educational technology solutions, which makes sense. More devices, more connectivity, more dependency on remote learning equals more use of educational technology. So there's a real proliferation, if you will, of applications being used. And that in many ways, for those of us who've spent careers in education technology, it has been a long awaited moment to some extent. But with that long awaited moment, there's been the creation of new problems. One of the biggest problems is there are just too many applications, too many disparate solutions. Teachers are struggling with, how do I use all these different things? My kids, I got to log in over here, I got to log in over there. I got one set of vocabulary being used in this one program, another approach used in this other program. I've got assessment data that doesn't connect to the instructional tools that I'm using, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a real pain point, and we've locked in on this notion of, with connected students, you need connected solutions. You need to make sure that these solutions are speaking to each other, are connected to each other, that you can access them from a single platform and point, that you can marry instructional content, curriculum, our sort of bread and butter at HMH, with assessment data in an effective way that allows teachers to really leverage the power of these new tools that they have in their hands. So that's a big focus of ours. Let me give you sort of just a real world example of what I mean by sort of connected solutions. So one of our newest programs at HMH is a program called Amira. Amira is an AI that listens to students read and assesses their oral reading fluency, which is the biggest predictor at early grade levels of student literacy levels, right? So Amira listens to students read, and then Amira goes further than that. The Amira AI will start working with students on tutoring and practice as well within the context of that solution. But because this solution, Amira doesn't just sit on its own, it's not just another cool EdTech app, it's integrated into our platform and our system. Amira also says, hey, I know that you're using the HMH reading into reading core literacy program. Here's some recommendations for what you should be doing with the student with those materials that you have. So now you have this AI-driven solution that's making recommendations to teachers to go back into their mainstream core curriculum and say, these are the materials that are most relevant for your students. That's the power of where we are right now.
So you're looking at the integration of all of these different platforms so that teachers and students don't have to go all over the place. But I want to take a step back though, and that is that one of the things, maybe an ed tech person who's waited for this moment, I don't know, but to me, I'm seeing through the pandemic a lot of problems with remote instruction. I mean, the last semester, I know there was an immediate lockdown and people had to turn things over overnight, but even now, not everybody feels that the remote learning is, the way they want to see all instruction done moving forward, that there's something I see in my own asynchronous class, to tell you the truth, a real gap between what I feel the way I'm teaching now compared to how I teach in the classroom, that I don't have the connection with my students, that there's, and I know that you are concerned about that teacher-student connection. So aside from some of the products and things that you might have, what are some of the things that we all could do as instructors in the remote learning environment to enhance that connection between teachers and students?
Yeah, I think you make a really important point, which I wholeheartedly believe, which is, even the best of remote learning is not a substitute for in-class, human-to-human teaching and learning. There's just no substitute. What we're talking about doing with remote learning is bringing some power to things that technology can do well, that can support human beings, and that allows human beings to continue to build relationships with each other, even with the barrier of being connected virtually. So it is definitely a barrier. It is not the optimal solution. We definitely believe that. I think one of the things you're getting at also is sort of the primacy of human relationship in teaching and learning. In other words, we always say, the relationship between teacher and student is the most important thing in education, and it is, creating a healthy relationship between student and teacher is a precondition for academic success and academic learning. Now, there are things that we can do even in a remote context to help facilitate that. One of the ways I've heard it best expressed by one of the educators that I've worked with is one of the mistakes we want to avoid is just seeking to replicate the academic side of school in the online context. Having it just be jump straight to letters and numbers and sounds and all of that, and not taking time to relationship build, to have informal time scheduled with students, have Zoom chats with families if you're a teacher, having silly games to build community among one's classroom. Those kinds of things that help create a sense of connection and community remain way more important than many of these other things. And in fact, they enable us to pursue the academic goals that we have.
We've talked about connecting the teachers and the students and having a technology that really is more seamless. But I want to go to parents while we still have some time, because I know that parents have really been struggling in this environment, especially parents of young children, because they really have to be with them, it seems, all the time while the kids are doing work from home on the computer. I know that's why many of them just want their kids back in school. I mean, you know, they're working, some of them are not even home, they're working. So part of the solutions that you've been looking at HMH, have they been thinking about how some of this technology, you know, can help parents, or what can parents do even now?
Yeah, it's another dimension of the challenges of the times that we're living in. Yeah, you know, I was just joking with you before we got on that I had to go check on my daughter. She's in a class session right now, right? So many of us working parents can relate to trying to do that balancing act. Talk about, you know, not ideal, not optimal. That is where we are right now. Making sure that we are, you know, continuing to pursue our professional responsibilities and obligations, and also doing our best to support our students. And I receive. I'm going to get back to your essence of your question, but for any parents out there listening, I just want to share a little bit of sage advice that I've been attempting to follow, which is have some grace with yourself. Make sure that you are not, you know, holding yourself to unrealistic standards. Make sure that you are, you know, make sure we are all recognizing that this moment that we're all living through together is not normal, and it is testing us in so many ways, and it's okay for us not to get it perfect and not get it right some days. So I think with that being said, there are things we can do as educators, as school community, even as providers like HMH, to welcome parents more easily into that teaching and learning process. You know, we are working right now in developing space on that platform I was describing to you, where we will have parents be able to access information that's relevant for them, little video snippets, access to their students' grades and information. But again, employing the same principle I just talked a moment ago about not just seeking to replicate just the academic side and sending parents a bunch of reports that they can barely read that say how their students are doing academically, but challenging ourselves to create venues for relationship building with families. You know, making sure that teachers are connecting with those families, still having teacher conferences, though it may be over, you know, Google Meet or Zoom or Microsoft Teams, et cetera, making sure that the school and school leadership is communicating and seeking to create opportunities for parent communities to thrive and continue, so that parents can connect with other families who are going through this craziness too. Because, you know, we're human beings. You know, things get easier when we realize we're not alone going through this thing, right? So
the truth
those are some of the things.
You know, a lot of teachers don't feel as comfortable with technology, and we always joke that kids are born in this age and they're so great with technology, but you know, that's not necessarily true for all of them. You know, so we're running out of time, and I want to get your overall vision. All right, if we are really going to close that digital divide, and you're saying in terms of getting equipment into students' hands and internet, we're really working on that. You know, there's progress there. Obviously, I agree with you, technology is going to be with us. It's here moving forward. What would your vision be for ways of really, what should we all be thinking about in terms of really closing the digital divide?
I think we should all be thinking about, even as we acknowledge the very real challenges, and we've talked about a lot of them in this conversation, how do we use this crisis to address long-standing challenges in education? In other words,
what are those challenges? What do you?
Yeah, I'm going to explain it. So how do we address issues of inequity in our education system? How do we tackle some of those persistent challenges that suggest, you know, zip code is correlated with academic achievement, race and ethnicity is too correlated with academic achievement, students in poor rural areas are not doing as well as they should in school, academically, advancing their college and career successfully enough, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we use this moment? How do we kind of open up the box of what we put our practice and this craft and all in, and open it up and say, what can we do differently that's pretty dramatic to tackle some of those longstanding challenges? I was with a superintendent the other day who made the comment. He said, this is definitely tough. None of us signed up for this, but I will tell you, I have students right now who are more engaged in the remote learning context than they were when they were coming to school. And his question was, I want to know why that is. And I want to know how I can replicate that more when and if things ever go back to what we used to call normal. I think that's the big challenge for all of us.
Do you know why that might be? Why some students are more engaged? I mean,
I do. I think it has to do with a couple of things. So my hypothesis on that one, and I shared this with him, was that I think that there are instances in which technology as a mediator for learning can be lower the risk associated with some learning activities. We have a program at H&H called Read 180. It's Leading Reading Intervention Program. And one of the developers of that program was a professor from Vanderbilt, Ted Hasselbrand. He has this famous sort of quote. I actually have it on my wall in my office. Whenever I get back to my office, I'll see it. And it says, the computer doesn't judge me. And it was a student in the late 80s who was using a computer to help them learn to read. Now, that's not a panacea. Again, you know what I believe in terms of the importance of human connection and relationships, but there is a suitable role for technology in helping us confront some of these challenges.
Thank you so much. We're out of time. So I want to thank you so much for giving us this much broader perspective on what it takes and what we might all do to really close that digital divide. Matthew Mugo Fields, thank you so much. Houghton Mifflin Harcourt, it's really been a pleasure to have you joining us today on EdCast.
Thank you, Linda. Real pleasure.
That's it for this edition of EdCast. Stay well, be safe. See you next time.
We'd like to hear from you. Please send your thoughts and comments to CUNYEdcast@gmail.com.